Yeah, hello everyone. Good evening, and it's a pleasure to have you all here. I am Saurabh Bararia, a partner within the Tax and CAPEX Growth Services expertise at Thornton Bharat. I'm also the moderator for this webinar and will be taking you through this insightful session along with my expert colleagues. As we are aware that the Union Cabinet, chaired by our Honorable Prime Minister, approved the Production Linked Incentive Scheme 2.0 for IT hardware to enhance India's manufacturing capabilities and exports under the nemesis of Aatmanirbhar Bharat on 17th May 2023 with a budgetary outlay of 17,000 crores. This PLI 2.0 scheme is expected to result in broadening and deepening of the manufacturing ecosystem by encouraging the localization of components and sub-assemblies and allowing for a longer duration to develop the supply chain within the country. Additionally, the scheme will also provide increased flexibility and options for the applicants and is tied to incremental sales and investment thresholds to further incentivize growth. Semiconductor design, IC manufacturing, and packaging are also included as incentivized components of this PLI 2.0 IT hardware scheme. The target segments under this PLI 2.0 includes laptops, tablets, all-in-one PCs, servers, and ultra-small form factors. With that background, I would want to introduce the eminent panelists for this webinar. We have with us Raja Lahiri, who is a partner with Thornton Bharat and focuses on the transactions and private equity and listings practice. He also leads the technology, media, and telecom sector for the firm, as well as the IPO advisories practice. He's a core member of Thornton's Global Industry Steering Committee, as well as the Global Technology Sector Group. With 25 plus years of experience, he has advised many technology companies in their growth journey across business strategy, consulting, due diligence, M&A, and fundraising. Our next panelist is Biren Vyas, who's a partner with us within the indirect tax and GST function and is based out of Mumbai. Biren worked as a full-time specialist on state laws with 30 years of hands-on working experience on all India state taxes. Besides, he's a core member of the GST expertise within the firm and is actively involved in driving GST initiatives. Our next panelist is Sachin Sharma, who's a director within the indirect tax expertise at Thornton Bharat. Sachin specializes in offering guidance and expertise in areas of production-linked incentives and other state incentive schemes by providing valuable insights and supports to clients in navigating and leveraging the eligible incentives effectively. Now I'll want to hand over the mic to my colleague Raja for a brief overview on the landscape of the IT sector, which is an enabler to the government's thrust to augment Aatmanirbhar Bharat through PLI and many other such schemes. It is a request to this august audience to kindly post your queries in the Q&A tab below, which is enabled for typing your queries. We will capture all of these and come back to you with suitable answers and also address some of them during the Q&A session. Raja, over to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Saurabh, and I guess good afternoon to everybody. I think truly appreciate everybody joining at this webinar. As Saurabh said, that the agenda of the webinar is really to focus on the PLI scheme, which is a production-linked incentive scheme for IT hardware. But I just want to give you at least my 2 bits on this. I think having kind of worked with the tech sector for the last couple of decades, obviously the sector from an India perspective has gone through a phenomenal change, right? Just 2-3 data points in terms of the impact of the sector. We're talking about close to $250 billion of revenue from tech alone from India. That's a sizable share of the India's GDP. Secondly, if you look at tech services itself, close to 50% of our exports come from tech services. So if you look at it globally, India has always been the leader in tech services, software engineers, cloud applications, and so on and so forth. Clearly, the sector is going through a transformation today as we see things around generative AI being talked about, but that's the software and the services part of it. And I think it's time to talk about the hardware. If you look at from the tech ecosystem perspective, right? We all started with the laptops, the desktops, in fact, the desktops, the laptops, now the tablets, the mobile phones, the servers. And I guess if you look at from that perspective, India, there is a significant amount that we are dependent in terms of imports. So from an India perspective, there is a significant implication as far as foreign exchange outgo goes. And second, which is, I guess, we have seen it all in terms of that's how it played out for all of us in business, the dependence on semiconductor. If you think about any electronic item today, starting from a laptop to a desktop to even a car key for an automobile, it's dependent on the chip. And where does the chip come from? It comes from the semiconductor. And we've seen the kind of importance of that and the impact it had on the supply chain, because clearly, countries like China, Taiwan, etc., plays a very, very significant role as far as semiconductor manufacturing goes. So I guess the government's initiative, and I think hats off to the government to really think about not just the Aatmanirbhar Bharat, but the Made in India initiative, but the real pivot to move into, to make India the electronic manufacturing center for the world. I think that's the vision. And if you look at it, the vision, whether it is to make it for hardware, laptops, desktops, PCs, or even the mobile phones, and finally the semiconductor, it's a journey. And I would view today as that transformation journey for India as it moves into the electronic manufacturing ecosystem, and not just for India, but for the world. And for that to happen, I think the scheme, which we're going to all talk about it, is really an incentive scheme to really attract foreign investments into India, significant investments to make this truly, this vision in practice and in place in the next 6 years. So first, it's a cash incentive scheme. So this is an incentive directly to the companies. Second, I think my 2-3 thoughts over here is that this scheme cannot be taken on an isolated basis. Because when we are talking about this transformational change, there are many, many factors which are important, and I'm sure the government is working towards that. It's just not the central government, but the state governments, because you need labor, you need skilled labor, you need the land, you need infrastructure, you need electricity, and all of that will make truly the ecosystem vibrant to create the vision of being the electronic manufacturing hub for the world. I think 2-3 key things which I see as outliers. I'm sure some of you would have noticed it, but India today is the second largest country of mobile exports globally, right? Which was very dependent upon, one part of the globe. India has kind of taken that leapfrog in the last 3 years. So $11 billion is mobile phone exports that happens from India. Second is around the semiconductor. There is a massive kind of play happening on the semiconductor in terms of companies forming joint ventures to really make that manufacturing happen in India. And I do believe that this is a space to watch out for any manufacturing tech entrepreneur or corporates, global and Indian. So watch out for that. And I guess the lastly I would say is this scheme itself. I think this scheme, and I think this was something which I think is very important for the government, is there was a scheme around IT hardware, but there was some feedback and there were some lessons learned, and the government acted very proactively to kind of incorporate some of the changes in this new scheme. So I'm very hopeful, but as I said, I see this as a transformational moment for the Indian tech industry. And to really cover the scheme in detail, and what it truly means for Indian corporates and global investors. I would like to invite the experts, the tax and regulatory experts, Biren, my colleague Biren, and Sachin to walk us through that. So to really over to you, Biren and Sachin, and take it from here.
Thanks a lot, Raja. Good evening, everyone. First of all, and Raja, as you've rightly mentioned, that probably, while India is focusing on a lot of areas, particularly, and while there was already one scheme which was already in place, yes, but the scheme which is currently introduced, if someone have a question in mind that why PLI IT hardware scheme 2 is needed. So I'll just brief on same for a minute, and then probably I'll move on to the couple of other points. So overall, if you see the while the comparison and all points, particularly between both the schemes are already covered in the subsequent slides. But overall, if you look at overall outlay, which is in PLI 2, which is increased to 17,000 crore, which is very close, around 16,939, which is almost close to the 17,000 crore, and that's quite a number of incentive of to propose to be offered is quite big number compared to the earlier scheme. If you see the average incentive rate which is offered is again is 5%, which is again considering the quantum that we are looking at it, it's again percentage seems to be quite high. That's second, which is again improvement. Third one, if you look at tenure of the scheme, which is again increased with the flexibility. Of course, I'll cover the flexibility part in points below, but the tenure is increased overall for 6 years, and in tenure also the flexibility that is introduced in this scheme, which was not probably which was not in earlier scheme. And the key point is the effective date. One may look at the effective date, which can be 1st June 2023, and if investment criteria need some more time, additional time, the projection and number of other points, if it no preparations, if it need more time, one can shift the effective tenure date, particularly to claim the incentive to 1st July 2024, 1st April 2024 as well. While effective date which they have announced is 1st July 2023, one can certainly shift to 1st April 2024, and the tenure of 6 years will start from that date, which is opted by the applicant, by the entity. If at all someone is not even too comfortable considering the investment is proposed, one may shift even that date to subsequent date, which is 1st April 2025 as well. And the tenure of 6 years and the entire incentive computation will certainly commence from that date. And that's how overall tenure is covered, introducing the multiple effective date. Yes, whether there's a cap on incentive, there is a cap on incentive which is certainly there, and what it is certainly covered in table below. What is the target? What are the product range? What is the covered in the scheme is something which is there are key target. It's bifurcated in two parts. One is the target segment, and another is other components and sub-assemblies. While target segment include important hardware products like laptop, tab, all-in-one PCs, servers, and USFF, which is ultra small form factor. While other specific components, sub-assemblies includes the list of product, but it includes one of the key component, which is system on chip, processor, particularly, which is already covered in it. And why the need of two part, which would like to highlight when it will be covered in the incentive part. There's a need of two part. One is target segment and sub-assembly, because the incentives offered are accordingly and the conditions are also accordingly set in the scheme. Overall category of the companies, it's bifurcated probably in three parts. Three types of entities broadly can apply. One is the global, second is a hybrid, and third one is domestic. Now, global, while we can understand very well what is to be covered under the global and domestic, for domestic, it's clearly mentioned that the stake above 50% should be with the stakeholders in India, and that's how the domestic is defined as. While for further clarification with regard to what is to be covered in hybrid, probably we will have to wait for announcement in the or further clarification in the guidelines. Incentive which are offered particularly for each categories are, which are, if you look at the global, if you look at the previous slide, please. If you look at the incentive per company, incentives offered are per company. That's one. And what is the incentive cap on incentive? Yes, for global, total cap is 4,500 crore. That's for global. For hybrid, it's 2,250, and for domestic, it's 500. Now, if you look at overall incentive cap, which is largely for global and hybrid, which is 9 times of the investment which is proposed. Now, say for example, global and hybrid, it's 9 times, while for domestic, it's slightly relaxed. And what is relaxed, I'll highlight in the slide. If you look at the investment part, particularly for all these 3 categories, investment part is for global, it's over a period of 6 years. What we need, what the entity needs to invest is up to 500 crore. For hybrid, it's 250 crore, and for domestic, 20 crore. Now, if you look at overall global, for global entities, 500 crore, but the incentive cap is 4,500 crore, which is 9 times. And similarly for the hybrid as well. And for domestic, it is slightly more. That's how overall scheme and investment criteria and the incentive which are offered. If you look at overall incentive perspective, the incentives which are offered, particularly are in range. Again, in first year it will be 3%. Say for example, laptop. Second year onwards it will be 2, 1, 1, 1, and that's how for average 6 years it will be average incentive offered for the each product is 5%. Again, it differ from the product to product. For key product like system on chip, which is mentioned there below, which is nothing but designed particularly for designed for semiconductors. Its incentives are as high as 3.24%. Again, now if someone someone have question in mind that if we have manufacturing of both, like say for example over a period of time, assembly and additional component as well, what will be the incentive that will be offered? Now, incentive that will be offered will be purely basis the sale of the product. If something which is manufactured and consumed as a captive consumption in manufacturing something, slightly technical, but just to highlight that in that case, probably for captive consumption, what is the status? We will have to wait and watch for the guidelines. One condition for incentives which I would like to highlight, that scheme is very clear on one part, that incentives are offered particularly for the target segment for first year, and then from subsequent year, that is from second year onwards, we need to go on adding the sub-assemblies and the parts, irrespective of number of options that you can select. You can select any one part like memory module, or you can select all of them for the purpose of manufacturing. But it's not only the target segment which one can focus for manufacturing, but you need to start manufacturing the sub-assemblies, component parts and accessories which are listed therein as a part 2. You need to start manufacturing those as well from the second year onwards. That's overall about the incentives. And if you look at the scheme overview, one point that yes, scheme offers particularly where it was clarified that the no incentive will be offered, or rather it cannot be claimed where someone has already taken incentive, but now they've already subsequent paragraphs they've already clarified that if benefits, if incentives are taken in PLI 1 for say for example for year first and second, in that case also if any entity would like to opt and take incentives under PLI 2 can certainly apply and commence taking incentive, particularly from the year second and third. That's something which is clarified. Of course, the rules guidelines will clarify more on the entire mechanism, particularly with regard to this investment under erstwhile scheme, which was particularly, if at all, if some entity has done for contract manufacturing or any other any other processing or any other support manufacturing, then probably even that will be covered as an investment under this PLI 2 scheme as well. That's also a clarification which is already mentioned. How the incentive will be worked out, probably they have just mentioned one point about incentives, while in a percentage which I have already clarified, that if at all incentive, if at all investment perspective, if at all for any reason there are shortfall in the investment percentage, then for the shortfall percentages, the incentive will be reduced to 50%. Now, say for example, if investment against 100, investment of 100, if somebody has invested only up to 70% of the committed investment, then there's a shortfall of 30%, then the incentive will be reduced to half, that is 15%. That's 30% divided by 2, 15%. Now that much percentage incentives will be reduced. That's the clarification which is already given. In that case, companies may plan out accordingly to give the projection in such a way so that it highlights that if at all, if it is between 25 to 50%, the projection of investment between 25 to 50% are there, then only there's a penalty. Now that means indirectly, as long as your projections are 100 or up to 125%, but even if you not meet up to 25%, which is incremental, there is no penalty even if you don't meet. So in that case, company may slightly give a projection accordingly, maybe with the optimistic numbers, and if not, maybe conservative number, probably which will be a good planning, particularly keeping these 2 points in mind. Number one, the investment criteria, and number two, penalty criteria. Penalty criteria is very clear. Again, if the overall estimated projection, probably where the investments are not in line, and if it is shortfall is between 25 to 50%, penalty will be 5%, and if it is more than 50%, then the penalty will be 10%. So considering the market business scenario, demand and all, one can certainly plan out the projection in such a way so that it works well for the business operations. And last point about scheme overview, which is laptop, tablets and all, for all the products, particularly the target segment, the prices particularly to claim the incentive prices are defined, which are already mentioned therein, for respective entities, which is like for laptop and other products as well. But again, it applies to only global and hybrid, and certainly for domestic, it's quite open that irrespective of the price that you quote for the product, incentives will be available. And that's how they've started they've started giving boost to particularly the domestic sector. This overall about scheme, what are the product, what is the tenure, what are the incentives, what is the coverage, and what about the other points like penalty and all. With this, probably what are the potential challenges that that are there. I'm sure probably this may be clarified in the guidelines which are proposed to be issued, but still at this stage I would like to highlight that the challenges perspective, investment criteria which in earlier scheme was there has been maintained. Probably while some of the industry players were expecting the reduction in the investment criteria, that's something which is maintained in the current scheme. Point number two is, the cost of land and building, whether it should be excluded or not excluded. Probably that's something which need again a clarification, and it will be very helpful to the industry players, particularly with regard to potential challenges. Second important point, again, procedural aspect, particularly for application filing application. if there are guidelines in place, it will be very helpful, particularly for clarity on the points that industry players are looking at it. And that's something which is, which is still awaited. Obviously, it's expected to be announced soon. Last point, which is again, entire production, particularly for the target segment, it will be on the semiconductor. And yes, semiconductors, if it is available, then only success of the scheme will highly depend upon the availability of the semiconductor, which one need to keep in mind. And this, how someone can address, is something which is again a challenge. With this, for next slide onwards, I will request my colleague Sachin Sharma to cover, probably more about PLI 2 and vis-a-vis PLI 1.
Thanks, Biren, and good afternoon, August audience. As Biren has mentioned, my objective of this overall objective is to compare both the schemes, that is PLI 1.0 and PLI 2.0, as well as the future roadmap kind of things. So, as you are aware that earlier PLI had short tenure of 4 years, less incentive rate, and low budgetary outlay. With an aim to overcome these flaws, PLI 2.0 has been introduced, wherein tenure has been increased to 6 years and incentive doubled, approximately 17,000 crore, as Biren has mentioned. Incentive under the new scheme will be on an average of 5% and can go up to 8% if we overall calculate 3.4 plus 1% plus 2% of tablet and so on and so forth, and which can go up to 8% of the incremental sales provided the applicant localize additional components as well as assemblies. This is significantly more than 1, 2, or up to 4% incentive under the erstwhile scheme, that is PLI 1.0 for IT hardware. Intent behind offering such a lucrative incentive is to localize the entire value chain and make India a global manufacturing hub for target segment products, as Raja has mentioned, Aatmanirbhar Bharat. Under the PLI, erstwhile PLI scheme, only 4 products in target segment were covered, like laptops, tablets, all-in-one PCs, servers. In PLI 2.0, ultra small form factor, which we call it USFF, has been included to widen the scope of manufacturing of IT hardware. USSF includes smartwatches, miniature cameras, Bluetooth earbuds, etc. Similarly, limited items were covered under erstwhile PLI scheme for localization, such as PCB assembly, battery packs, power adapters. Government has again widened the list of components and sub-assemblies for localization under new PLI, with a focus to enhance domestic manufacturing. PLI 2.0 targets or intend to manufacture all the components gradually in India. Examples of PCB assembly, battery, power adapters, add-on controllers assembled in India, bare PCBs, solid state drives, and display panels. So if we go to next slide, please. So erstwhile PLI, under the erstwhile PLI, no localization criteria was specified for the first year. However, from second year, PCB assembly were required to be localized. From third year, battery packs. From fourth year, power adapter were required to be localized. With respect to PLI 2.0 or new PLI scheme, the applicant will have to localize PCBA and assembly during first year, and thereon at least one component as or sub-assemblies need to be added every year, considering the vast list as ministry has provided. From categorization standpoint, or from company standpoint, only 2 categories of applicants were there in PLI 1.0, is global IT hardware company and domestic company. Under PLI 2.0, a new category of applicant, that is hybrid company, has also been introduced. Although it has been mentioned in the scheme notification that it would be a mix of domestic as well as global company, the detailed meaning of this category of applicant is yet to be clarified by the ministry. Similarly, if I talk about global company, again, detailed clarification is yet to be clarified by the ministry. We can get more insight about this when guidelines are released. From eligibility criteria points, although Viren has already mentioned, but take a cue from that. Let's take an example of incremental investment after 31st March 2023, wherein global IT hardware company has to invest 500 crore over a period of 6 years. So how that calculation would happen? Let's say 50 crore to be invested in first year, adding 100 crore in that, that is 150 crore to be invested in second year, and so on and so forth. During all these 6 years, 500 crore needs to be invested for the overall setup. But if we talk about incremental sale of manufactured goods, then 1,000 crore needs to be 1,000 crore production needs to be done in first year, although it's a 9-month period which has been given, but 1,000 crore needs to be done in first year, and second year 3,000 crore, then 4,000 crore, and on the 6th year 15,000 crore sales to be achieved. So there is no addition, it's on incremental basis. So there is a difference between what is cumulative, what is incremental. That's what it says. Similarly, for hybrid and domestic companies also, there is a different criteria which has been given. For hybrid, overall investment during the 6th year to be done is 250 crore, and overall incremental sale to be achieved is INR 500 crore rupees to 7,500 crore rupees. Similarly, for domestic companies, 20 crore rupees to be invested in 6 years, and INR 50 crore to first year INR 50 crore, then 6th year is 500 crore to be achieved. So different eligibility threshold criteria has been introduced for different categories of applicant. Indeed, I would say PLI 2.0 sets a higher incremental sales target. So from base year standpoint, under PLI 2.0, flexibility has been provided in choosing the base year, as Biren has mentioned. So year of participation will determine the base year for computation of net incremental sale, unlike the erstwhile scheme, wherein the base year was fixed as 2019-20. If the applicant wishes to participate from 1st July 2023, the base year would be financial year 22-23. In case the applicant chooses to participate with effect from 1st April 24 or 1st April 25, the base year would shift to financial year 23-24 or financial year 24-25 respectively. New thing which is penalty. Under PLI 1.0, no penalty was prescribed. However, in the new scheme, penalty provisions have been specifically inserted in case of a non-achievement of threshold, whether it's a sales or whether it's an investment. Such penalty provisions has nowhere prescribed or inserted in any of the PLI scheme, barring IT, barring auto, pharma, etc. This provision has been introduced to curb unlawful practices, as it has been seen in other schemes, wherein large players were involved in inflating their sales by issuing fake invoices. In our view, it is a welcome move, as applicants will be more conservative while showcasing their projections, and it would provide room for smaller players also to participate in the scheme. So unlike PLI 1.0, there were only few, I would say, in single-digit participants got the approval. But we are anticipating in PLI 2.0, maybe double-digit participants will get the approval. So in case of a variation between the estimated and actual sale, that is between 25 to 50%, penalty of 5% will be deducted from the actual incentive amount. In case of a variation is more than 50%, penalty of 10% will be deducted from the incentive amount. Similarly, so if we can go to the next slide, please. To successfully implement the scheme and reap benefits out of it, it is crucial to follow a well-defined roadmap. The first step is to thoroughly comprehend the scheme criteria. This provides assessing the factors such as projected revenue, investment plan, employment generation, localization plan, domestic value addition projections, so on and so forth, and they can achieve through their participation in the scheme. Once the applicants have determined their eligibility, the next step is to obtain necessary regulatory approvals, licenses, certificates, and permits to set up the plant beforehand in order to avoid last-minute rush. Subsequent step is to file the application and submit detailed project report, we call it DPR, with the authorities. Applicants need to prepare a comprehensive application that showcases their capabilities, potential, and alignment with the scheme's objective. Effective representation and articulation of their value proposition can significantly enhance their chances of approval. So it's all about how we are preparing the DPR, how we are showcasing it, and what are orders we have in hand. As a part of application process, applicants would also be required to obtain certificates from professional or statutory auditors validating various aspects such as investment, sales, and other relevant factors. So these certificates serve as a evidence of compliances and strengthen the participant's position within the scheme. Post obtaining approval, approval letter disbursement procedure would come into play, which is very critical phase of incentive journey. Applicants must closely follow the designed procedure and ensuring all necessary approvals. Adherence to timeline is crucial part, I would say, to avoid any delay in disbursement process. To maintain compliance and track progress, applicants are required to fulfill periodical compliances like quarterly review report, QRR, on-site audits. These reports monitor the performance progress and effectiveness of the applicant's activity within the scheme. Taking reference from the erstwhile PLI scheme, the applicant should keep a few information handy in order to avoid any last-minute delay. That is basic information of company, MOA, AOA, base year sales purchase data, regulatory approval, other factory, etc. Next slide, please. Time and again, Ministry has further exceeded the support to sectors closely related to IT hardware, such as large-scale electronic manufacturing, telecom and networking products, white goods, etc. Although the application for availing PLI incentive for such sector has been closed, however, the approved applicants need to clearly demonstrate their commitment for making investments and achieving sales to received incentive. For this, Thornton Bharat is actively engaged in supporting such companies for post-approval support, such as filing of QRR, DPR, disbursement claim, obtaining requisite certification, licensing with the ministry, and get the claim from the ministry. In addition to central government's initiatives, several states also offer incentives to attract manufacturing unit like Tamil Nadu Electronics Hardware Manufacturing Policy, Gujarat IT ITS Policy, Maharashtra Package Scheme of Incentives, and Uttar Pradesh Data Center Policy. Thornton Bharat is also engaged in assisting companies by facilitating effective communication with respective state governments, and more so, creating a comprehensive package of incentives tailored to cater such needs from client to client specific. This way, companies can benefit from a comprehensive range of incentives available both at central as well as state level. Considering,
I think, Sachin, one very valid point which you mentioned here was about these potentially upcoming schemes. And, these schemes have a lot of interplay with the current scheme of PLI 2.0. And I think the entire value and the supply chain, which, you mentioned, Viren had touched upon, and Raja spoke initially, will have a very good perspective. And I would request that Viren would also touch upon the semiconductor policy, just as a synopsis. And I think that would potentially help the audience also understand what the government has in mind. So any concluding remarks on this before we get Viren to talk maybe something on the semiconductor scheme?
Yeah, so most of the products in the target segment of PLI IT hardware 2.0 are also made from semiconductor, as you have rightly mentioned. So chips, so semiconductor design, IC manufacturing, and packages are also included. So of course, it is very valid and important aspect. So I will request Viren to share his insight on semiconductor. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks, Sachin. Thanks, Saurabh. I'll just touch upon the semiconductor scheme, though it was announced earlier. Would like to just highlight that the guidelines are recently issued, while the coverage is, completely clear, and probably one need to keep in mind that the incentives are as high as the 50% of the project cost. One need to look at entire guidelines, and it clarifies the multiple points in quite detail. Nothing more than this. It's quite attractive. Scheme is something which I would like to highlight. Overall, highest incentive which are offered. Next, please. Yeah, and another just one point which with regard to the display. There's another scheme which is already part of it, but yes. As a second part, overall capital investment and capacity perspective, again, which is already clarified in the scheme. And again, the incentive which are offered are 50% of the project cost, which probably, in my view, are quite decent compared to the all other earlier schemes which are highlighted by the Sachin. Yes, with this, next slide, please. So yes, overall, more or less the guidelines offer the same which is covered in PLI 2 IT hardware, which is already IT1 hardware, which is already discussed in previous slides. Nothing more to highlight except application date, which is 1st June 2023. Till further notice, there is no end period which is mentioned, and that's the key part. Yes, it's open as of now.
Thank you, Biren. I think that was pretty insightful from an overall perspective and understanding, the linkage. And we all are aware that what the semiconductor issue is, and Raja did mention that in brief earlier. So, we've had some good perspectives given, and what I understood that large scale electronics, the overall level playing field with emerging opportunities. So there are a lot of sources like ICEA, LCNA, which talk about industry estimates. And they say that India is at the pivot, and that pivot is where India would want to, increase their overall efficiencies, increase skill development as part of this overall IT hardware manufacturing. Couple of questions, Biren, which I thought about with this level playing field on emerging opportunities, which I thought that would be very relevant for our audiences here to understand, in terms of how people are going about and what is the government's perspective. So one question which comes to my mind when you did explain, and Sachin did talk about, two schemes, 1.0 and then 2.0. So what do you think possibly could have been their objective of coming out with another scheme? I think the first scheme was one of the first PLIs in the country. So what was the reason for notifying a revamped scheme in your view?
Sure, Saurabh, just to highlight, irrespective whether it's announcement or any development, there will be always scope. There is always room for improvement, and that's exactly the government is also following. They are improving day by day just to meet the focus, and that's the core part which government has kept in mind. See, erstwhile scheme, if you look at it overall, while it was announced, it was particularly with an objective to incentivize domestic manufacturing IT hardware to create a level playing field vis-a-vis competing nations. But overall, the response was comparatively, it was not as envisaged by the government, particularly for the two reasons. Number one, the limited outlay, and number two, limited outlay with incentive, which was percentage, which was comparatively lower, while there was representation from various entities as well, particularly to increase average incentives and the total outlay, particularly which was not considered in the earlier scheme, but now they've introduced this scheme, which is PLI 2, with more incentive and the broader outlay. That's the overall key focus area they have kept in mind while announcing this another scheme, which is a welcome move.
Thank you. So Sachin, we heard from you that a couple of times that you need to look at the guidelines more clearly. So one thing which comes to my mind when I've heard Biren and you talk about the scheme, and I'm sure our audience also wants to know, 1st June 2023, the scheme was opened. The guidelines are not yet issued. When are they expected? What do you foresee in terms of the delay? Do you foresee any extension? It's quite strange that till now this has not been done. So your thoughts around that, Sachin?
Yeah, so Saurabh, in fact, from guideline standpoint, they will be get released within a due course of time. If I talk about previously, or so to say, PLI 1.0, the scheme guidelines were issued post 45 days after the scheme was notified. And the application window was also extended by 15 days. So in similar lines, we believe that sufficient time would be provided under this new scheme also, and their extension would definitely come. So we believe that will happen. Extension will come.
Okay, perfect. So you believe an extension would be come. And Sachin, we also heard from you about investment, okay? And we heard about the cumulative approach of investments, and looking at the base year on year, you need to undertake those investments. So when you talk about investments and we had those numbers there, what would be included as part of this eligible investment? What, in your view, as an expert, would you say that would it be matched with the previous guidelines, or how would they look at eligible investment?
So again, notification has not yet clarified the items that would be included in the eligible investment. So taking cue from erstwhile PLI guidelines, we may infer that eligible investment would include expenditure on plant and machinery, research and development, transfer of technology agreements, and associated utilities. It may also include second-hand plant and machinery as well as equipment, though such equipment's life would be up to 5 years, or they can also, residual life would be up to 5 years. So these kind of things would be included considering the erstwhile PLI scheme. Of course, land was not included there, that can be excluded. And similarly, internal loads from the overall factory standpoint, internal loads can also be included. And if there is a R&D center which may not be into factory premises, but outside the factory premises, with the approval, that can also be included. So of course, that is based on the experience I have in the IIT hardware as well as other PLI schemes. On taking cue from that, I'm saying. But yes, let's wait for PLI 2.0 guidelines as well, which may give more insight. But overall, this is the reference we can take. Overall, this would get covered.
Sure. Thanks, Sachin. Thanks. And you did mention a very important point, that land was not covered. So Biren also touched upon one aspect. He said that, this is one of the key things or the key differentiators, and, there could be a demand around that. So Biren, next question to you is, what we understand from, public domain, that 14 odd companies were approved under the previous IT hardware scheme. What is the current status of disbursement for these, of incentives for these companies? Can you throw some light around that?
Yeah, sure, Saurabh. So you rightly mentioned that approx 40. So rightly, 14 companies, applied, and it was approved for 14 companies. But understand, out of 14, only 2 entities could meet the investment criteria, and that exactly what I have highlighted in my slide of challenge. That investment criteria is something which is point number 1 probably, and that exactly because that's the reason only 2 companies could meet that out of 14. And second is the shortage of chips, semiconductor chips, which again has been highlighted as a challenge in my slide, because that was the reason overall incremental sales perspective or investment perspective, other companies could not, other entities could not meet the criteria, and those were key challenges, particularly in PLI 1. Probably unless they come out something which come out with some more clarification with regard to all these points in guidelines, particularly, it will be more helpful that if they overcome these 2 challenges. And those were the challenges for PLI 1. We look forward, for some decent resolution in the guidelines, clarification in the guidelines to be announced.
So interesting point, I think, Biren, you made, that we look for resolution in the guidelines. And what we've also seen from sources and we understand from public domain is that industry bodies have clearly said that, the scheme did not fairly, the 1.0 scheme did not fairly compensate for the disabilities faced in shifting the production base to India from countries like Taiwan, China, Vietnam, etc. So, one question which now comes to my mind, and, it is relevant at this context, is, was this a reason why they introduced the concept of hybrid company? Hybrid is added in, PLI 2.0. So was this one of the reasons why it was, hybrid company was introduced? Or can you throw some light on what could be typically hybrid?
To be very frank, hybrid, probably it will be a combination of global and domestic both. Now, as they have clarified with regard to domestic that the stakeholder should hold more than 50%, particularly Indian stakeholders should hold, and that's the clarification which is already issued in notification. But for hybrid, to be clear, hybrid nothing has been clarified so far, and we are looking for clarification. We are waiting for a guidelines, but it will be a combination of domestic plus global both. But again, a further detail with regard to this combination needs to be clarified in the guideline.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you, Biren. So my last question in terms of given the time frame, and we would want to understand if audience also has any queries, is directed to Raja. So Raja, you heard both the experts dissect the scheme and give their views, starting from what could be investments, what could be the eligibility, the incremental amounts, the target sector, the target segments, then the products, etc. So according to you, this 2.0 PLI, will it be a great boost to the Indian economy? We are all aware that there is a national policy on electronics which came in 2019, and there's a lot which the government is doing around specs and many such other things. So what is your take on this overall session also, and also on the fact that this PLI 2 would be a boost to the Indian economy or not?
Yeah, no, thanks, Saurabh. And obviously, thanks a lot, Biren and Sachin, to really walk us through detail around the scheme. Obviously, the theme is how do we make India a resilient economy, right? That was a really theme of this session. And I just go back to what I started. See, this is a transformational moment for us, right? What was tech services? If you think about way back in 1980s or 1990s, early 90s, we were just nascent, right? But today, if you look at tech services, you cannot operate anywhere in the world without an Indian engineer and an Indian tech company, right? While tech goes through the transformation as far as software is concerned. I think for tech, hardware and electronic, I think India is at that same stage, maybe in early 1990s, right? Because today, what are the driving forces? One, and I think we've said that, every one of us have said that, it is a semiconductor, right? It is the heart and the soul of any electronic item today, right? Globally, anything that you touch on. So I guess that's the first thing, that you got to get that ecosystem, supply chain, manufacturing, right? And it's not going to happen in a day. There's going to be many, many challenges, but I guess that's the first opportunity for us, and we're going to get that right. So the semiconductor aspect, the manufacturing aspect, the supply aspect, and making sure the chip is actually can be manufactured and got into all the electronic items that we're talking about. So that's one. Second is, it's a very clear driving force. If you look at the US policy, they have clearly said that they are going to shift the manufacturing and dependence around semiconductor chips, mobile phones from other nations to other parts of the world. And that's India becomes a center of all that opportunity. So that is the driving force, right? Which I would say that we have no option but to do well in this area, right? There is a demand which needs to be filled, and which better country that can produce that? It's India. And I think the third thing I would say, that nothing of this is going to come easy for us, right? I think Sachin talked about it, the guidelines, right? It is still to come. Biren talked about there are still some nuances about land and cost. So there is definitely some work that needs to get done in terms of clarifications. But I think more importantly is that the investment criteria is also quite steep, right? And I think maybe that's a question for us to ponder, debate, is who are the companies that we really can get onto the scheme? So domestic companies, global companies, and as you said, sort of hybrid companies, right? So how do we make sure those companies truly come and start manufacturing and start taking their incentives? In my view, right, that's going to be the real test for the scheme, that are we able to really attract those investments, not just by the PLI scheme, but having the other enablers that I talked about in the beginning, which is infrastructure, power, electricity, labor. How do we kind of make that ecosystem enabled? And I think these are the three things I would say, which would be important. But as I said, I would be very, very hopeful because we are at the cusp of that electronic manufacturing phase for India. Just to give you some statistics, our current share, India's current share on the global electronic manufacturing is not even 4%, is just 3.75%, and that is it. Whereas in tech services, we are close to 40%. 40% of all the world tech services comes from India. So in electronic manufacturing, we are not even 4%. So that's the opportunity for us. Second, if you look at, we talk about mobile phones. If you look at the PC penetration market, the personal computers, laptops, desktops, etc., right? It is still an important part of our usage. US, the penetration is 78%. China is 41%. India is 1.5%. And that is it, 1.5%. So there has to be a demand which will be generated in the coming decade. And clearly, these companies, as we're talking about investments, they will have their returns on investments. And finally, I would say, NASSCOM has said, pretty much the Indian tech industry has said, this is not India's decade only. This is the decade which will be defined by India. So I would say, broadly speaking, I would be very, very hopeful. I won't get disappointed because there's going to be challenges in this scheme as well. But I think the industry needs to come together to make sure that we make this happen for the country.
Thank you, Raja. I think that was really insightful, and we all know that what the impact of personal computers is to the overall governance, access, education, productivity, and I think this is a very, very welcome move by the government. With that, we've come to the end of the session. We have questions which are posted, and we will get back to all of you in terms of the questions. It's a request that the QR code will be put up. You may scan, send in your queries to us, and we would be answering them. Grant Thornton is proudly saying that it is organizing this event as part of its overall outreach, and we would like to hear from you and from the industry on the opportunities to explore PLI 2.0 and how it will benefit your business. Thank you everyone for joining us today, and it's been a great seminar.
And I would just want to say thank you, Saurabh, for moderating the session so well, and of course Biren and Sachin, and thank you the audience for being there with us. I just want to say that from a Grant Thornton perspective, we are passionate to shape this ecosystem, the tech ecosystem, and of course the Indian opportunity. So we'll be very glad to hear your views and work with you on the scheme, and as we take forward the opportunity for tech. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.